Wow, we've come a long way. We've put everything on the motherboard, CPU, storage devices, memory. The motherboard is now in the case, along with the GPU, the air cooler, the thermal right, contact frame, the cryonaut paste. Power is now connected, fans, lights, audio cables, everything. Now we still have some storage devices that we'll deal with a little later, and also I haven't forgotten about the Wi-Fi cable that will connect in a little bit, but for the most part, we are now ready for the scary part of all this, which is turning it on. So let's clear the way. No, I'm not going to do that. You probably thought I was going to toss these boxes around. Before moving on, we really have to talk about the whole issue with Intel 13th and 14th generation CPUs and the degradation issue that Intel has acknowledged. This is a pretty interesting topic. There's a lot of hot debate online, and you could spend days trying to figure out what's at the heart of the matter. According to Intel, and there's this great Reddit thread that I have linked, the whole issue is with CPUs operating sometimes at too high of a voltage. And the bottom line is, already in spring, Intel had put out their so-called baseline profile. That allowed motherboard manufacturers to incorporate that. Users could choose that baseline profile, and that would limit the wattage to 253, and it would also limit current to 307. Well, these are depending on the exact CPU chip, but in any case, various limits based on your chip. Now, recently, there have been additional fixes put out there. You may have heard of the so-called Microcode-fixed. So that apparently fixed a bug in the ETVB system, the Enhanced Turbo Velocity Boost system. So Asus has already had that out for about a month, 0x125 fix. And just a few days ago, they put out this additional BIOS that incorporates Intel's latest fix, which is the 0x129. That addresses elevated voltages. And initial testing is showing that the current BIOSes that motherboard manufacturers are putting out there seem to be addressing the issue just fine, not revealing any significant performance degradations. So at this point, based on what Intel has already done with its various fixes, and the motherboard manufacturer is rolling out BIOSes that contain those fixes, and reputable level-headed people doing some tests to confirm that those fixes work and don't introduce any major issues, then I think the logical step forward is to just feel free using an Intel 13 or 14th generation chip. Don't worry about all the nonsensical, farcical fear-mongering going on out there, and get on with your life. Intel offers an extended 2-year warranty, so the worst that can happen is your CPU, like any CPU out there, could experience a failure that requires a replacement. And hey, thanks to this extended warranty, you get that replacement over a longer period of time than otherwise. Or is that crazy talk? Anyway, for me, I don't think it's crazy. That's what I've done. So let's get that latest BIOS update from Asus. I'm going to the Asus website for the ProArt 790 Creator Wi-Fi. The BIOS we're looking out for is this version 2504, which contains this 0x129 microcode. This is the latest one that Intel has put out there that fixes some of the issues with the 13 and 14th gen CPUs requesting too high of voltages from the motherboards. Prior to that, there was this version 2402, which updated this microcode 0x125, which apparently fixed a bug in the Enhanced Turbo Velocity Boost functionality of the Intel chips. So if you update to 2504, you'll also have this fix. So go ahead and download this 2504, even though it's a beta version. You can download the release version later. I've already done that and extracted it to my USB stick. It's this file right here. And just copy that someplace because you're going to add that to your USB drive a little later. Okay, I'll show you how to create a USB flash drive for installing Windows 11 or whatever version you want to install. So you just type Windows install USB in Google, and the first option will be exactly where you want to go. Create installation media for Windows. I chose Windows 11. So you'll want the second option, which is to create the installation media. That'll download the media creation tool, which you'll open up. Hit yes. So now you might have to wait a little bit. Accept the agreement. I unchecked the recommended options because I don't want anything related to this PC to affect the installation files. You want to make sure to select USB flash drive and that you have a USB drive plugged in that has at least 8 gigabytes on it. So I see a drive that I've put in. And again, you might have to wait a bit. In this step, we'll definitely wait a few minutes, so I'm just going to skip ahead. Okay, so things are finishing up. Next, you'll see verifying your download, followed by creating the Windows 11 media. We'll skip to the end here. Okay, so it's finishing up, and there we have it. And recall earlier you saved your BIOS file. Make sure it's named this way and that you copy it onto the root of your USB drive. It has to be named this way if you use the BIOS flashback function of the motherboard. Otherwise, you can name it however you want if you plan on using Easy Flash in the BIOS. But I'm showing the BIOS flashback method, which is pretty convenient. Now let's go back to the computer and fire things up. Okay, so we're at the back panel. Now, before we get everything connected and fired up, there's a unique feature of this motherboard that allows you to update the BIOS without even going into the BIOS in the computer. What you do is you download the BIOS onto a USB stick. You plug it into the slot on the back that says BIOS. Then you press this little button until it lights up green 3 times, and then you wait for it to flash. So I'm going to plug the USB in, plug in the power cable, and it's turned on. Now I'm going to press this button to start the flashing. So it's 1, 2, 3 times. Now if all goes well, it'll start blinking quickly. Okay, so now we'll just wait for the flashing. Now that light will probably blink a couple 100 times, so we won't wait for that. I'm just going to fast forward. Okay, so it's finished flashing. Now we're actually ready to boot the system and see how that goes. Let's not forget to attach a keyboard and mouse. I'll attach to the top panel. Okay, again at the back panel. So I'm just going to remove this USB stick for now. I'm going to plug an HDMI cable in. I could also plug in a DisplayPort cable into the 6950 XT here. I'll just use HDMI. We have our Wi-Fi antenna. So we connect these two. By the way, in case if anybody's wondering, this room was not designed by MC Escher. I've simply turned the camera around, and that chair in the background is just a regular chair on the floor. It's not attached to the wall. Okay, and so this antenna conveniently attaches to a surface. And let's not forget to attach a keyboard and mouse. I'll attach to the top panel. Okay, so we have our USB stick ready. I'm going to plug it into the top here, so I have a adapter that allows me to plug into a USB-C. So plug that in, and we already hit the power button. You say we dim the lights a bit. Here goes power. Alright, I hear fans working pretty loudly. I hope we're seeing some good things here on the monitor. Alright, so we seem to be in good shape. Now we'll get into the BIOS. Okay, and then you'll get into your BIOS. You'll see that this BIOS version 2504 is correctly installed. Well, you should see that anyway. Otherwise, you have some troubleshooting to do. First thing we want to check is that the USB stick is being seen okay. So we see that here, UEFI. This is for Windows to boot up and install. Here's some things to note about the default settings here in version 2504. XMP is disabled, so we can enable that. And hit F7 to go to the advanced view, and then AI tweaker. Notice at the top you have Intel default settings. Also the Asus Enhanced OC profile. It's recommended now to use the Intel default settings if you want to maximize the stability and longevity of your CPU, which is a good thing to do. Clicking that tells you what it does. For the case of my CPU, a 14700K, it's going to set the ICC max, that's the current, to 307 amps. It's going to set the power limits 1 and 2 to 253 watts. So hit OK. Now we're going to make some adjustments and see if we can get better performance, lower power, lower temperatures. I know that seems like an impossible goal, but there's a lot of information online on how people are doing it, and I've gone through the days of research to figure that all out so that you don't have to. By the way, this cooler points 162, that's a very good score actually. Not bad for an air cooler. Anyway, let's go to the top. Intel Adaptive Boost technology. We're going to disable that. SVID behavior, I'm going to set this to typical. Or if you have great cooling, choose best case scenario. Typical scenario seems like a good middle ground. We're not changing anything in these settings here, so just keep going. Internal CPU power management is where we want to be. I'm going to change AI AC load line 0.1. Now what's suggested here is to start at say 1 and then run a test, a stress test. For instance, the Intel X2U stress test. And keep lowering this by 0.1 until that stress test fails. So in my case, I saw failures at 0.06, thereabouts. I then went from there up a bit back to where I didn't have a failure. So 0.1 is my sweet spot there. Yours might be lower, it might be a little higher. Just go through that procedure to determine what this should be on your BIOS. Or if you'd rather not go through that process, according to this Reddit post, you can actually just try setting it to 0.5 and, as this guy says, call it a day, because that'll most likely lead to a very similar result that you would get using this more tailored approach to choosing the AC load line. IACEP, this is something that is recommended to disable when you're doing anything that amounts to undervolting. In setting this IA AC load line to a lower value, it amounts to a form of undervolting. And this is supposed to help you achieve a little bit better performance. IAVR voltage limit. Technically, you probably don't have to do anything here because the 0x129 microcode automatically limits the amount of voltage the CPU can request. That said, a fair number of users applying this 0x129 microcode fix reporting that they're still seeing vCore peaking around 1.5 or even greater. So this is an extra step that can keep that vCore down and thereby help with your overall stability and longevity. In any case, I'm going to set this to 1400, which is 1.4 volts. And then go back. Under Tweaker's Paradise, I like to set undervolt protection disabled so that in Intel X2U I can experiment with undervolting if I wanted to. Go back and then hit F10. Here's a good review of the changes we're making beyond the Intel baseline. These are what I just walked you through. Now don't hit OK here. I had you press F10 just so you can see how we modified that Intel baseline profile. So now we're going to continue making additional BIOS settings, the settings that are really needed to make sure things work okay on the Mac side. So let's move on. Then we go to the CPU configuration under Advanced. And what we want are active performance cores all, active efficient cores all, and hyper-threading enabled. This will help Mac make use of all the cores on the Intel 14th generation chip, along with some additional tweaks we'll make on the Mac side. It won't be exactly like it's done on the Windows, but it'll still be excellent performance nonetheless. Still under Advanced, we'll go to System Agent Configuration. You want to make sure VTD is enabled. In the past, on the Hackintosh side, people have suggested disabling that, but it's considered fine to enable it with the right settings later when we set up Macintosh. Next, memory configuration. You want memory remap enabled. This is what enables above 4G decoding. Graphics configuration, this is important. We want primary display to be PEG slot, which means the PCIe graphics card, which we've installed onto the motherboard. iGPU multi-monitor, we want this to be enabled so that when we're on the Windows side, we'll see both the iGPU and our dedicated GPU. On the Mac, remember, we're just going to use a dedicated GPU, and in our settings, we'll have it not even consider the iGPU. Next, we go to Thunderbolt. And these are all default settings, which should be fine for now. Note Thunderbolt boot support disabled. Now we go to Trusted Computing. Security device support enable. One thing I forgot to mention in the video is that for UEFI variables protection, you actually want to disable that, because on the Mac side, we're going to want CFG unlocked, and to perform that CFG unlocking procedure, we need to have these variables get rewritten, and so disabling this allows those variables to be rewritten. Now PCI subsystem settings, we want resize bar support enabled. With this enabled, we'll have to make a little adjustment on the Mac side so that doesn't screw things up. And the 6950 XT is a GPU that can take advantage of this. Now we go to USB. We want XHCI handoff enabled. And you should go ahead and disable USB legacy support as well, as that's a typical recommendation in the Hackintosh community. Under network stack configuration, you want this disabled. Onboard devices, we'll be using all these, so no need disabling anything for now. Now on to boot. Since we only have one bootable disk right now, this is fine. We also want to go to CSM. Under boot, we want this disabled. Under secure boot, other OS, custom. Boot configuration. For now, we can disable that. That'll just give us the maximum likelihood of having no trouble on the Mac side. We can enable it later to see if there are any issues. Alright, so we have done what we've needed to do in the BIOS. So we go to exit. It's just showing us some settings that apply to what we've chosen. And now hit OK, and the computer is going to reboot, and because you have that USB Windows installer, it'll boot to that installer. If all went well, we should see the Windows installer coming up soon. Okay, so you choose your language, time, keyboard, and install. Again, I'll skip ahead. Okay, so now we should see the computer reboot. So now we see Windows installs resuming. Alright, so during Windows install it said there would be several restarts, so we're on to another restart here. So now it looks like Windows has finished its restarts, and now we should be going into Windows. Okay, I am not physically in the United States right now, but we will hit yes, and yes. In my case, I will add German. It's already seeing the Wi-Fi, so that's a good sign. Okay, so we've connected to the internet via Wi-Fi. Okay, good that we see this message, otherwise we might have turned off our PC right at the moment. So now we can expect another restart. Now we see the Windows welcome. Name your device. And another reboot. I don't think we were warned of that reboot. but probably normal, nothing to worry about. Okay, so Windows wants us to sign in to your Microsoft account. Okay, so after you've added your account information, you'll continue on, and Windows will detect if you have another device running Windows. And in my case, I'll just set up as a new PC. I'll create a pin. I'm going to turn off some of these options. I don't think I'll lose my PC, so I'm going to turn off that as well. I'll skip this. Skip this as well. I don't need to back up photos to OneDrive for now anyway, so I'll skip that. Okay, that could be useful to bring in browsing history. I think I'll decline. I'll decline this as well. You can always add these kind of features later if you need more space. I'm going to skip this. I don't plan on using this computer for gaming. Hi. You would think they could have thought of a better salutation. Okay, for now I'm going to hit no about this. After you hit yes to download that Asus Armoury Crate, make sure you launch the installer for that. That Armoury Crate installation procedure will look pretty similar to what you're seeing on my screen. It might differ a little bit. The main thing is just to make sure you get that successfully installed. At this point, it'll be useful to look at Device Manager in Windows. So you type that into the search box, and then Windows will pop up the Device Manager option, so you click that. And you end up here in Device Manager. Now, see under other devices, we have these exclamation points. Other than that, everything is fine. Otherwise, we would see additional exclamation points. So what we'll do to fix this issue that we're seeing in Device Manager is we need to run that Armoury Crate program that we just installed, and that program is going to download all the drivers needed to make those annoying yellow exclamation points disappear. So I've launched Armoury Crate. Also, temperature looks like it's varying from 30s to 40s, so that's fine for idle. So we want to go to this tools bar, and we see it's detecting some drivers that did not get installed. So if you're just running this and you didn't download individually, this will probably show a whole bunch of other checks. So we'll just hit download and install, and I'll skip ahead to the end of this. Okay, so looks like we're going to do another restart. So we are back in Windows. We'll open Device Manager, and now we're looking good, which means we can move on to the next steps.